Some people grow older, but never truly grow up emotionally. You've seen them before. A man with gray hair throwing a tantrum because he felt disrespected. A woman smiling politely while quietly manipulating everyone around her. Someone who collapses emotionally the moment life stops going their way. Adult body, child nervous system. And the terrifying part is this: most emotionally immature people do not realize they are emotionally immature. Because emotional immaturity rarely looks dramatic at first. Sometimes it looks charming, funny, confident, even successful. But pressure reveals everything. Pressure is the great exposer. The moment rejection appears, criticism appears, failure appears, conflict appears, the mask cracks. And suddenly you are no longer speaking to an adult. You are speaking to an injured child, trapped inside an adult identity. That is what emotional maturity truly is. Not intelligence, not money, not age, not status. Emotional maturity is the ability to remain psychologically stable when reality refuses to obey your desires. That is rare, very rare, because most people spend their entire lives reacting instead of understanding themselves. They become slaves to moods they never learned to question. Anger controls them. Fear controls them. Validation controls them. Ego controls them. And modern culture quietly rewards this emotional chaos. Think about it. Outrage gets attention. Impulsiveness gets celebrated. Emotional explosions go viral. Instant gratification is treated like freedom. Meanwhile, patience, reflection, self-awareness feel almost rebellious. Because emotional maturity requires something the modern world trains people to avoid. Sitting with discomfort without immediately escaping it. That is the beginning of adulthood. Not paying bills. Not getting older. Facing yourself honestly. And that process starts with something deceptively simple. Naming what you actually feel. Sounds easy. It is not. Most people never truly learned emotional language. They only learned emotional reactions. So they say, "I'm angry." But underneath the anger is humiliation, fear, rejection, insecurity, loneliness. Anger is often just armor, the shadow wearing a mask. Imagine someone snapping at their brother over the last donut. Ridiculous on the surface. But emotionally, it was never about the donut. Maybe they already felt ignored all day. Maybe they felt powerless at work. Maybe they carried resentment they never addressed. Then one tiny inconvenience became the final spark. That is how emotional immaturity works. Small triggers activating unexamined emotional chaos beneath the surface. And emotionally immature people almost always make the same mistake. They obey every emotion immediately. If they feel angry, they attack. If they feel embarrassed, they withdraw. If they feel criticized, they become defensive. Impulse becomes identity. But emotionally mature people understand something powerful. Feelings are real, but they are not commands. That changes everything. Because the moment you pause long enough to identify an emotion instead of becoming possessed by it, you regain power. The king returns to the throne. Most people never reach that point, because accountability feels psychologically threatening. And here lies one of the greatest differences between emotionally mature and immature people. Immature people protect ego. Mature people protect growth. An emotionally immature person would rather preserve the illusion of being right than face the pain of transformation. So they blame, deflect, excuse, rationalize, anything to avoid confronting themselves. Because admitting fault feels like ego death. But emotionally mature people understand something paradoxical. Taking responsibility hurts your pride, but strengthens your identity. Every honest admission builds psychological resilience. Every excuse weakens it. This is why emotionally immature people often remain emotionally frozen for decades. They repeat the same relationship mistakes, the same self-destructive patterns, the same conflicts. Not because life never taught them, because ego prevented the lesson from entering. And eventually, people stop evolving emotionally while continuing to age physically. That is one of the saddest things a human being can become. An aging child, still reacting to life with the same emotional habits they formed years earlier. Still controlled by validation. Still terrified of criticism. still emotionally dependent on external approval. The body matures, the nervous system never does. And perhaps nowhere is this more visible than in how people handle negative thoughts. Because emotionally immature minds often become psychologically hostile toward themselves. Constant criticism, constant catastrophizing, constant internal warfare. You're not good enough. You embarrassed yourself. You'll never change. Everyone sees your flaws. The brain becomes a courtroom with no defense attorney. And over time, those thoughts stop feeling temporary. They become identity. Psychologists call this cognitive conditioning. Repeated thoughts become neurological pathways. The more often you think something, the easier your brain accesses it again. Meaning emotionally immature people often unknowingly train themselves into suffering. Not intentionally, habitually. This is why awareness matters so much, because once you start observing your thoughts, instead of automatically believing them, something incredible happens. You separate consciousness from emotion. You realize, I am experiencing this thought. Not this thought is me. That separation is psychological freedom. But most people never create it. They fuse completely with every emotion entering their nervous system. The shadow speaks, and they obey automatically. That is why emotionally mature people often appear calmer under pressure. Not because they feel less, because they have learned how not to drown inside themselves. And this is where emotional maturity begins becoming deeply uncomfortable. Because real maturity requires admitting something painful. You are not always the victim of your emotions. Sometimes you are the enabler of them. Sometimes your suffering continues because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar growth. And that realization changes everything. Because now the question is no longer what happened to me. The question becomes, what am I reinforcing inside myself every day without realizing it? That is where emotional adulthood truly begins. And in part 2, we need to confront the hardest truth of all, because emotionally mature people eventually learn one psychological skill that completely transforms relationships, conflict, identity, and inner peace itself.